So we've got the head pretty much shaped. Make sure that you've got it all nice and round and got his nostrils on. His mouth fits in underneath. So now round the back of the jaw if you haven't done that. And now we can start working down the neck and getting this rounded. Remember, the grain is up and down, so the grain will only let you work one way on that, otherwise it'll dig in. So work that down and start rounding the back here and the shoulder in here, because eventually we've got to get rid of some material to create the belly underneath here. So we'll just do a bit of rounding on here and kind of work our way down. Then after that we'll work on our hips. So I'll just mess around with that a bit. So I've rounded the neck. I've done that on both sides. Give that a shape all the way up from just below the mane, then down the neck here. You'll notice that I've still got a sharp edge here, but I have on the other side created the scoop here so that I get a nice smooth transition from the top of the leg up.
So can you look at the profile from the back, from the tail?
Sure.
So the neck stays...
Like that, you mean?
Yeah, like it seems quite wide whenever it's blank, but
Yeah.
you're narrowing it down.
Yeah, you can make the neck as skinny or as thick as you like. If you make the neck skinny, then the head looks bulbous, quite big. It depends on what kind of character you want to get out of it. There's no right or wrong. You can do that. So you can see the hip in the diagram here. It goes up and around, but it really doesn't indicate anything going on at the back. Well, we've got to finish it at the back as well. So in actual fact, I'm going to create a hip that goes right back to the back and gives a nice transition. So in the actual carving, so you've got the shape. We did the shape earlier. We got that front part of the hip established. So now I want to continue that back and round over the back here and give it a shape. So I'll use a B tool to do that. So we'll get in here and just be a bit aggressive. That piece of brown stuff in there is hard to carve. And I'll turn over the back as well. So now it's just a question of giving it some rounded shape. If you take a look at the finished one, you'll see what I mean. I'm creating a whole shape in here so that that hip stands out. Eventually I'll have the back rounded. So in order to make the back rounded, I have to move the hip forward a little bit. In other words, I have to take a bit of material off of this side here, and I'll just use a gouge upside down to give it that shape. Okay. This is a number 3, 12 millimeter, so you can just get in there and use that upside down to give it that shape. So you can see where I get the shape coming pretty fast there now. I'll proceed and get one hip done for you. It doesn't, the diagram doesn't really show you a top view, and all the old diagrams used to give you a top view as well, and it's kind of helpful to have that. But this area in here is not very clear as to what happens there. So I interpreted it as going back in. And can you see that? Get it on a piece of paper there. see that it goes back in on an angle. There's a wedge taken out of there. So in other words, the leg has to match up with the innermost part of the hip. Like the leg and the hip work together. They have to come together. So I remove this triangle in here. So on our one that we haven't done anything with, we're talking about creating an angle in here like that. And in order to get rid of this material here, then that'll create this back foot then will come out and go around, but this gives you access then. It helps form the tail and gives you that design that comes back in to create the leg as it comes back in to meet the hip. It has to meet the hip. So just take that wedge out and I'll do it and show you. So there it is with the other side removed. I just roughed it out. So now we have to create the back part of this hip. So I would give it a little bit of a shape like that so that the hip comes back. So remove this piece here, and that will allow them to lay down. So if you look at the finished one, you can kind of see the idea that I mean here. You want to create the back of it. You could give it even a more pointed elbow back in here if you want, but that would suffice just to get that kind of flat through there and then rounded to come out in the bottom. Now we gotta eliminate a little bit of material on the tail, and you can see there's not very much of a diagram here to indicate the tail, so you gotta more or less just round it. So on your tail here, you're going to have to start to round this so that it starts to come across, and you can eliminate the material here. You can put whatever sweep you want to have in here. And this guy here, I flared it out a little bit at the end, but it's not necessary to do that. But you can see how basically all I did was round it and round it where it goes into the bump. So just take your time and start shaping that around. Just get rid of some material straight up and down before you get before you actually create the tube. I'll go ahead and do that. So anyway, there's the shape. You can visualize how that comes around. Maybe a little bit of a flare out at the end, maybe not. There's no details yet. So now we're going to work rounding it over his back a little bit, keeping in mind that the center line is going to be the most protruding part of it, and then we're going to round over from that somewhat. So I'll just use a fairly flat gouge. I use number 5, and upside down, go with the grain, start to round over the back, get rid of all the sharp edges, work your way up on both sides. Just Wilf just pointed out something to me that I really hadn't noticed, but in the design you can see that the one hip is higher than the other hip, and that is obvious here. Like this is the same hip referring to. It's a bit higher than this one here. So yeah, you might want to knock this his left-hand side hip down to bring it down a little bit more even. It's out by a fair bit, more than 1/8 of an inch, I would say. So don't be afraid to knock it down and maybe give it a slightly different shape in the back.